Welcome to Women Grow's Virtual Classroom, everyone. My name is Shayla Taylor, and I will be your host for this informative session on learning the laws of the industry. Before we start, I have to sincerely thank our sponsors, Root and Grow. I want to thank them for supporting Women Grow's narrative and platform. Hundreds of thousands of people are arrested for cannabis possession each year. Furthermore, people of color are targeted for these arrests, and this has detrimental impacts on their communities at large. The issue is not new to the community, but has compounded generationally through systemic racism and feminism. The issue continues because many people are not aware of the laws or cannabis possession. Today, we change that. We are here to educate you on your basic rights to cannabis plant and how to protect yourself. The Women Grow community cares about you. Rooted in good care cares about you. This is how we fight back for you. Our guests today are Natasha Andrews and Tara Hopper. It is our honor to have these experts in the field. Natasha Andrews, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Natasha Andrews. I'm an attorney of 25 years and I'm the executive director of the National Association of Black Cannabis Lawyers.
Alrighty, and Tara, can you also briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Tara Hopper. I have a background as a social worker, government affairs, legislative worker, and I am now an attorney in the cannabis world. And my background is mental health and health law.
Alrighty.
I also work for inside 3 large cannabis companies.
Okay, so now we are going to get into our questions. And the first question I have for today is, can I drive with cannabis in the car?
So
I take that, Natasha?
I don't mind taking it. I want to first let everyone know that the answers that we're going to be giving today may have some state specific aspects to it. So understand that we'll be answering from a general perspective, but there may be things that you need to be aware of in your state. Generally speaking, driving with cannabis within a state that is legalized is not a violation of the law. Again, always check with your state to make sure that's the case where you live. That if your state has legalized cannabis, um, it depends on how it is legalized. If you're legalized only for medicinal, you're still required to have and to carry that medical card with you. If you are licensed for both recreational, adult use, and medical, then the possession of cannabis in your vehicle is not something that, generally speaking, is a violation of law.
Yes. And if I could add to that, it's I look at it very similar to like open container laws with alcohol. It's like you just can't have it out in the open. It has to be stowed away, either at least in Massachusetts, has to be in your glove compartment or in the trunk of your car or put away. It can't be out on the passenger seat of your car. If you're pulled over, you can be fined up to $500, for example.
Wow. All right, so that leads to our next question. Are certain communities targeted for possession of cannabis?
Again, I don't mind jumping in. That's a complicated question, right? It's a pretty loaded question as to whether certain communities are targeted. Of course, there is no official policy anywhere. You probably won't find it on anyone's books that we are targeting these people. But we are all fully aware that the actual implementation of law, the execution of law, and who gets um, what punitive measures are taken against groups can sometimes be predicated on bias or based on the bias of whoever it is that's enforcing that law. So you should always be aware of your surroundings, aware of your situation, and aware of the area that you're in terms of how that law might be measured out. There is a big difference between what you are legally entitled to do and what might happen in any given situation. So being aware of the law is important, but also being aware of your situation is important. Sometimes it's better to acquiesce and work within the situation you're in and deal with the legal consequences of what should and shouldn't be on the back end, because of course safety and coming out of any situation in the best position possible is always going to be more important than whether or not you're right.
I mean, and as I'm sure many of you know, I mean, the fact that cannabis was illegal was predominantly because of racism, because of targeting Black and Brown communities. So when you have a history like that, and then you also have society that is very based on socioeconomic status and the way that we tend, police forces have in the past, and that I have seen, like when I was in Miami and I did a ride along in Opelika and I saw them just scanning plates of people trying to get an excuse to pull people over so that way they could meet their quota for the night. And they knew that a lot of those people, all they had to do was find a plate that wasn't registered, and they couldn't register it because they couldn't afford to register it. So you have the whole socioeconomic cycle that comes down to cannabis as well. And there's, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, right? I mean, and this is a whole seminar within itself. I'd imagine many of you would agree.
Yes, for sure. So our next question would be, can I drive from one state to another with cannabis?
You're not supposed to. It is illegal.
Yeah.
The best, I don't want to step on. Are you good?
Yes.
I guess the best way to think about it is this way. Cannabis is still federally illegal. Don't get it twisted with anything you may have heard in recent news, any announcements that have made. Nothing that's been announced to date has legalized cannabis from a federal level. And when it comes to driving from state to state, what you're dealing with is the notion of interstate commerce at a minimum. You are using federal roadways and byways to get from one state into another. You could be in violation of federal law. Even when you're going from two adjoining states that are both legal, you run the risk of being in violation of federal law, which means that the penalties for that could be severe. Always remember that whether or not your state is legal, federally speaking, there is no such thing as legalized cannabis.
Okay. And because of like when you're looking at this, like as a non-lawyer, like federally, it's illegal. So interstate commerce says you cannot cross over that state line because it is only legalized in our state. So we have to fall within those specific rules and regulations within our specific state. Just because, as Natasha said, it's next door, you can't cross over and say, oh, okay, well, it's legal over here. Well, you just violated the federal law in order to go over and be legal again in that particular state. However, if you didn't purchase the cannabis there and consume the cannabis there in that state, you are not following that state's specific laws. So you have to follow that state specific laws. And by jumping over the border, so to speak, you are in essence not in compliance with the law.
So our next question is, why is cannabis a cash business?
You want to take that, Natasha? We were so good going over these yesterday. You're awesome.
Sure, why not? Cannabis being a cash business goes back to what I just said. When you look at the fact that federally it's not legal, you can think of a lot of things that aren't legal. I think an easy enough example would be if I ran a meth lab, I cannot open a bank account and say Meth R Us is my company and I want to do business as the owner of Meth R Us. It's something that's an illegal substance. Again, because federally speaking, cannabis is still illegal, you deal with banks, which oftentimes most of us are used to Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Fifth Third Bank. Those banks are federally insured. Federally insured banks, you hear the word federal in there, cannot allow for banking with something that is federally illegal. So because of that, many states and many programs and many legalized cannabis infrastructures don't allow for the utilization of traditional ways of paying. You can't just open a bank account. You can't just use your debit card. You can't just use your credit card because those generally tap into federal funding, federal monies. And when you're dealing with something that is federally illegal, you don't have an avenue there, which means the alternative is cash. Cash is the way that sort of keeps that clean.
Yeah.
Sort of clean.
Although it's funny being in a state like Massachusetts, where we went from medical to adult use, and now we've been with adult use since 2016, you see all the banks that, are now taking a risk and saying, okay, well, we had the Cole memo that said they weren't going to come after us. And, okay, well, we're going to take these different accounts, and then we're going to put a whole bunch of different fees, because we're going to charge, so we can charge these companies these really ridiculous fees that we would never charge any other business, just because we're taking this risk and allowing them to not be forced with all cash, which puts the person in danger and is really not, could potentially put someone in danger, because, having cash on hand all the time is, it allows people to come in and try to take that cash, or instead of putting it in a bank so it can protect the business owners and the consumers. So
And
luckily, with the Safe Banking Act, or the Safer Banking Act, that seems to be coming down the pipe finally, we're going to be able to take care of that measure.
Okay. Well, that actually, what you were saying actually leads to our next question, because it's, how does operating a cash business impact the business owner?
Go for it. You started. Go for it.
So how it impacts the business owner, so many ways. Just now, like in Massachusetts, a business owner can utilize a debit card and a credit card from certain credit unions, certain banks. Definitely makes things a lot easier. You don't have to feel like you're being targeted as much. An all cash business, in the beginning, people would talk about cannabis businesses and think, oh, wow, they have all this money in their safe. Well, now they talk about, like in Massachusetts, for example, I think it's like 75 to 80% of the transactions are done through debit. So there isn't that same issue anymore. But that's not for all states. So you find a new state, a lot of, newer states in the South. Some different friends that I have, that, like, I think one's in Mississippi. She's telling me that it was a little difficult down there still. I haven't tracked all of them, but I can speak for Massachusetts, and how it appears New Jersey is following suit with allowing some other banks coming in. But again, they usually come with fees or some other ways to, make your bank account special, because they're taking the risk, and then you have to be penalized in other ways for still violating federal law.
And I'd just like to add, the danger, as we discussed, Tara and I both discussed, that the danger is twofold, right? Although the danger is pretty much the same, whether you are the consumer or you are the business owner dealing with cash, there's of course the imminent danger of being robbed, or having someone trying to follow you because they know that you have cash. They know that when you walk into these dispensaries often enough that you have cash. People who have the intention of doing wrong and would be bad actors kind of seek out easy targets for what they plan to do anyway, which is to separate you from your money. When you're a patient or a customer going into a dispensary, as I said earlier, always be aware of your surroundings, because there is that danger. Most of us have gotten used to not carrying cash. Most of us swipe and tap our cards, or use, Zelle or Cash App or one of the other EFT manners of paying for things in today's day and age. But because cannabis has sort of taken us back in time, people are left with very little option, in many cases, where they have to use cash. For the owners of businesses that deal with cannabis and deal directly with plant touching products, they have that heightened level of danger every single day and every single hour of the day. Whenever they have that money on hand, we're talking about a lot of danger. They are easy targets for crimes. And it is up to the states at this point to put forth measures that help protect both owners and the customers that would utilize and patronize those businesses.
All right. All right. So our next question is, if I rent a house to live in, can I smoke cannabis?
That's entirely up to your landlord. If it's, but by law, we know that, at least I compare it to tobacco. If your landlord doesn't want you to smoke in the house, they don't have to let you smoke in the house. But if you have a medical card and you're in a medical program, they can't tell you that you cannot consume your cannabis. You just can't smoke your cannabis. Now, I mean, it's their property and they don't have any, they can't tell you that you can't, have your medicine. But other than that, I mean, I think it's one of those areas. It's going to come down to litigation with people arguing and fighting with each other. And it should be an interesting thing to see roll out.
And I would also add probably that this is an area that I would definitely say to check with both your state and local laws, because where we can give some generalized information, remember that none of this is federally regulated. And so there are very few federal laws as it pertains to legalize cannabis because federally it's not legal. So states have the right to implement all kinds of laws and regulations within their cannabis legalization framework. So I would certainly recommend that anyone listening to this, anyone who has a question, look to their lease, look to the local law, and look to the state law as it pertains to your rights and the usage of cannabis. But clearly, as Tara said, if I own property and I don't want people smoking anything on my property, at least from a recreational standpoint, generally speaking, I have the right to tell them that. And that's a right that a landlord should sort of have because of the impending smell, the disturbance to other people who might live on the property, and the long lasting effect of having repeated smoke on their property. Of course, as Tara said, medicinal use is very different than recreational use, but there still might be some laws as it pertains to how you consume your cannabis. So just make sure you stay aware of that.
Okay. And the last question I have is, what is probable cause?
What is it? The reasonable person has the ability to think that something has happened or is going to happen. That sound about right?
That sounds about right.
It's one of those things that you just get so ingrained in your head in law school, you just kind of know what it is.
Right.
Reasonable suspicion versus probable cause. Reasonable suspicion. What is it usually? Like if you have an idea, if you smell something, probable cause is if you actually see it and actually know it. So then you get a valid search warrant. You basically could make an arrest or have a search warrant if you have probable cause. If you have reasonable suspicion, you can only look a little bit, depending on what we're talking about.
So the only thing I'd add to that is that question is sort of in a vacuum. If you've watched 2 minutes of Law and Order, you've probably heard probable cause. You probably have an idea of what you think it is. Understand that there is the objective, right? It's what is said on paper and what the law says and what we all those of us who went to law school, what we studied, and then there's the actual application, right? So when I mentioned earlier, knowing the difference between what your rights are, but also being aware of the situation that you're in, it is one thing for there to be a standard of probable cause, and it is another thing to see how that is actually applied. Yeah. Sometimes what is touted as probable cause, an attorney might later find out was not probable cause. But I don't think in any instance you as a layperson should try to make that determination and try to stand behind that situation, because it can put you in a dangerous situation. So I would recommend that you take note of things that take place, take note of your surroundings and situation. If for any reason you were to be stopped and think that perhaps the person stopping you, the officer stopping you, might not have probable cause, absolutely take note of that. Absolutely ask for representation if that becomes critical to your situation, but never try to be combative about probable cause, because in all likelihood that will not work in your favor. Just take that with a measure of caution. If you are ever in a situation and you feel as if probable cause is not there for a search, for instance, if you're driving a vehicle and you think there is no probable cause for your vehicle to be searched, you can certainly exercise your right to say that you don't want your vehicle searched, and that you demand that if there is a charge against you, that you be advised as to what that charge is. But I always recommend to people to take caution over being right and not being here is not particularly useful. So you really have to decide, would you rather be right and not here, or right and deprived of your liberties, or would you rather be aware of what's going on, take note of what's going on, maybe even verbalize what's going on, and deal with that on the back end when it is safe to do so? That's the only caveat that I would throw out there with that.
Okay, that was very informative. So now I'm just gonna the last question I have is, can you each provide your information for people to be able to get in contact with you furthermore? So in terms of social media or email, a way that the people watching can get in contact with you all.
Um, I can be found at Instagram at Tarajuana, Tarajuana. My name is actually Tara Jean, and that's what they used to call me in college in Spanish class, so it kind of stuck. Um, and then also with my company, I co-founded Bada Bloom, so it's at BADABLOOM as in Michael 420. And my email is TARAJ Hopper HOPPER LLC at Gmail. So if I can be instrumental in any way, reach out. So
Awesome. And then with me, if you're looking for NABCL, you can find NABCL at www.nabcl.com. You can find us on LinkedIn by NABCL, or National Association of Black Cannabis Lawyers. You can also find us on Facebook. On Instagram, we are NABCL_LLC. If you're looking for me personally, you can also find me under Natasha Delanois is the middle name, and then Andrews on Instagram. And I'm sorry, on LinkedIn, and on Instagram, it would be Cannabis, CANNABAWSE. So the Cannabis on Instagram.
Alrighty, so in conclusion, Women Grow is here as a catalyst for change and equal opportunities. We hope today's discussion has served as a protective measure for your own safety as it relates to cannabis possession. We thank you for joining us and look forward to a day that these conversations are no longer relevant. Thank you, ladies, and have a good night.
Thank you.
thank you.